Good afternoon. Thank you so much, for coming back. You real diehard jazz fans. Yes. We are absolutely privileged and very pleased today to present Christine Passarella to present this Coltrane, Kids for Coltrane workshop. Now, she is the creator of this concept because Christine is a New York City public school teacher. She has a degree from Adelphi University, but she had this idea that kids were a lot more in tune with the world and astute about themselves and learning than most schools and teachers and sometimes even parents give them credit for. So it's using the music of John Coltrane in particular, and jazz in general, that she created the Kids for Coltrane concept, working very closely with Ravi Coltrane and others to really help kids tap into their creativity, intercultural learning, critical thinking skills, empathy, social cultural history, and just a wide range of dynamics, that generally isn't part of the learning curriculum for elementary school kids. And she is doing this now for some 600 children a week in the New York City system from preschool to middle school. So you have preschoolers listening to John Coltrane, tapping into their creativity and learning about themselves. So, yes. Her work has been touted in publications like the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times for its innovation. And so I am absolutely delighted to present Christine Passarella, who, as we said, as part of this concept, will be also working with Dr. Cornel West in a portion of this program for you today. And though he needs no introduction, we'll give a few words about Dr. Cornel West. He's a provocative and provocative cultural commentator and scholar with a BA degree that he earned in 3 years from Harvard University and a master's and PhD in philosophy from Princeton. He's taught at Yale, Harvard, University of Paris. He's currently at Union Theological Seminary. He's written 19 books, edited 13, known for classics like Race Matters and Democracy Matters, and his memoir, Brother West, Living and Loving Out Loud. And he's heard weekly with Tavis Smiley and West on National Public Radio. So again, I am delighted to present to you Christine Passarella as the director of our program this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanne. Thank you, Joanne. I first met Joanne in Harlem about 6 years ago, Joanne, I think, at an NEA event. And it was the people at Jazz at Lincoln Center that asked me to come by and say some words after a presentation. And Joanne was kind enough to speak with me, and we had a dialogue over the years, and here we are at this moment. We're here to celebrate the vibrations that John Coltrane sent out to us. He's not here with us in the flesh, but certainly he's here with us in spirit, and I know that for sure. So how do I know? I'm going to show you an overview of my work, and then you could tell me if I'm right. When I'm done, I'm going to ask Dr. West to come up, and we're going to have a dialogue to talk about education and John Coltrane. So what we're looking at is a slide that was created by my students. It was improvised. I turned around and I saw this created, and that's what we do in Kids for Coltrane. It's a creative program where kids are allowed to ask questions and not be afraid. It's a safe environment. We ask generative questions. It's not rote education, as Dr. West would call it. We attempt at paideia, a deep way of learning, and something that is long-lasting that children can take with them when they go out into the quote-unquote real world. And it's a place where children are learning about caring and compassion and a deep empathy, and not just empathy. I think if you're a kid for Coltrane, whether you're young or old, you are a person with deep empathy, but it's more than that. You have to have empathy, and then what? What do you do with that empathy? How do you change the world and make it a better place? And so the Kids for Coltrane is a program that brings jazz to children. They learn about American history, but the truth about American history. Publishers could put whatever they want in books in a certain sense, but then we listen to John Coltrane, and he tells us the truth about American history, because music doesn't lie, and John Coltrane certainly left us the truth. We learn about equality, we learn about character education, And we learn this through the arts. And by doing this, children become invested in literacy, creativity, compassion, curiosity, and courage. This is a quote I wrestle with. W.E.B. Du Bois tells us, children learn more from what you are than what you teach. And as educators, so much of our day is filled with, this is a curriculum, you should teach it, and do it well, and we do. But who are we? Who's standing in front of the children? Are we modeling, making that difference? And John tells us, when there is something we think could be better, we must make an effort to try and make it better. It's the same socially, musically, politically, in any department of our lives. And so I believe I was called to help in this regard in connection to John. Our class trips include visits to the Louis Armstrong Museum, which has been very enriching. If I was teaching here in Washington, you would find me living at the Smithsonian, the Metropolitan Museum of Art. We had folks from the museum come to my classroom frequently to talk about the great master's work in connection to music. And here's a picture of my classroom. We were doing some work on Picasso. And if you could see those faces, it's a very happy place. We've also incorporated philanthropy in our work. We have concerts annually, and some of the work goes to our arts program, and some of it goes to others. We worked in conjunction with the Coltrane home in Dix Hills, and we're trying to turn John's home into a museum. And I was fortunate enough to, I love them, some t-shirts we made. I was fortunate enough to be invited into the room where John Coltrane wrote A Love Supreme. I'll give you an example of some of the type of things I do. We do songwriting. We bring American history into the classroom. And we were having a dialogue, the children and myself, about a woman named Ruby Bridges. And if you don't know who Ruby Bridges is, I'm assuming you all do, but if you don't, she helped change the world by ending segregation in America. So we wanted to meet her. So year after year we wrote and we figured out how to raise the money. And sure enough, Ruby Bridges came to our school. There's nothing like primary knowledge, and I thought I knew all about Ruby Bridges that I could muster and read about. But there she was in front of me, and I wept. To hear her story in person is unbelievable. And to have the children learn firsthand from Ruby was unbelievable. They'll never forget it. And what they did was they wrote her song called A Child of Ours. I just wrote some lines that they wrote. Child of courage, sparkling jewel, treasure to behold, a child of ours, here to show what we all know, that love is right, it brought her might, justice for all, she prayed. When everybody was screaming at her the day she was trying to enter that building and they showed her a little white coffin and they gave her death threats, she stopped and she prayed. She told us so much. I wish I had time to tell you all that she told us. But the little girl with the white bow in her hair, that's Kennedy. She's actually a fashion model too. Her father told me that for a month she laid out her dress, the dress she would wear to meet Ruby, and she would just touch it every day. So you know that they will never forget Ruby Bridges. They also wrote a song for John Coltrane called Hamlet's Child, in which they think about the day John was born and what he meant, and that children need people like Train to protect them, and he does through their music, through his gift of sound. We were noticed by Nat Hentoff, who is a writer, and at the time he was writing for the Wall Street Journal, and he's the one that called us, the kids for Coltrane, and we took off after that. Then the New York Times came to see us. This is a view of my classroom. Into the beautiful, beautiful music of John Coltrane, and they were just awestruck. They were most impressed with him because of his originality, because of the message that you don't have to stop playing at a certain time. You could keep going. You could express what you feel over and over again. You're not done because someone tells you you're done. You're done when you feel you're done. And they connected to that message. And we explored his music, and we studied it, and we had to learn that it changes, and we had to have a critical ear, that some music isn't simple to listen to. It's more complicated, and you do have to invest more time, and that's what we did. Here we go. And what impressed the children the most, I think, and myself, was his spiritual journey, and most importantly, connecting to the way I teach, his individuality, and the way that he insisted on living his life and expressing himself his way, through sheets of sound, through I'm not done until I'm done. I do feel, like I said, I do feel that John Coltrane's music has been brought to me to encourage me to continue my mission and my vision, and that is to allow children to learn in an environment in which their intelligences are respected. And I really feel his voice talking to me through the music that this is the right thing, that this is the way children should learn. And to me, John Coltrane exemplifies a human being that insisted and was courageous enough to say, this is how I must express myself while I'm here on this planet. This is me, let me be. And so that's a message I give to my students as well. I want them to be individuals. I want them to learn in an environment in which their intelligences are respected. Children welcome what's complicated, and they can take it apart. They're innocent and pure, and they can see the beauty.
What is it? What is it?
Namia. Oh, it feels like sadness, like sadness, and like it's a little bit of joy. And one day I found John Coltrane's house, and she said that was the one that we're doing to save it, to make it into a museum. And I like doing research.
And so it just was a perfect fit. Dr. King's work and John Coltrane's work seem to tell us a story about love and giving and how to be better people. And that's our goal. Mainly how to find peace. That was in 2008. The New York Times just decided to drop by, not too much pressure, and the children just chatted with them, and that was the outcome. Those children are back under my care now that I do a music literacy program, and they're in 8th grade. And so the legacy of the Kids for Coltrane has been going on for quite a few years now, and I can tell you there'll always be Kids for Coltrane. We're a community of learners in this very unique way. John says, I never even thought about whether or not they understand what I'm doing. The emotional reaction is all that matters, as long as there's some feeling of communication. It isn't necessary that it be understood, which gave me a lot of confidence because I wasn't sure exactly what 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds, and so on were getting from it, but I knew that they would be affected by John's music. The emotions were powerful. And as you could see, when the little boy said, or the little girl said Naima, I didn't even know how to pronounce it. So there's your evidence that this was very organic. I can pronounce Naima now. Jazz musicians quickly found out about us, and the Jazz Foundation of America monthly sends jazz bands into my classrooms. Nat Hentoff put us in a book. He calls me maybe every 2-3 months, and we chat. And Nat told me that the Kids for Coltrane is some of the most important experiences he's ever had, having a dialogue with me and kind of mentoring me through it. And then, of course, I had an opportunity to get to know Ravi and the family. Fuji, you're up. And other like-minded people. Winton gave me a hug and a kiss and sent over some great material to use. Yoko Ono sent us her well wishes and gifts for the kids for Coltrane. Former President Clinton sent over a note of support, and from my understanding from the Coltrane Home Board, it was difficult to get his attention, but I sent a gigantic letter with a gigantic envelope that we created, and when he got it, he just had to open it and respond. And part of my journey is learning from the best. I'm blessed to be in New York, and I get to go to live jazz shows, and meeting people like Jimmy Cobb and all the other greats has had a big impact on my ability to continue, because it's not easy. The bureaucracy throughout the country seems to be pushing away from the arts. So to keep the arts in education takes a lot of dedication in creative thinking, because there isn't a budget. My research also brought me to places, and this is the day that, in fact, Joanne, I think we met, right? So A.B. Spellman and David Baker and Billy Taylor were all there, and we had, I was in the audience at the time, but A.B. did come up to me and said, I wish I had a second grade teacher like you, which was very flattering. The day that I put my hand on that doorknob totally changed my life, because that's John Coltrane's home, and that's the doorknob that he touched every day when he went home, and finally when he wrote A Love Supreme. And I was already doing the work with the children, mind you. We were already in the Wall Street Journal, but when I touched that doorknob, I knew I was on a mission. That's his backyard. That's inside the house. Fuji is well aware of that. Now they have the stained glass window, right, Fuji? They found it? They found it, yeah. And that's the room where John wrote A Love Supreme, and in that room, I made him a promise that I would continue his mission. I wasn't sure exactly what it was, but I knew, standing in that room, I was being called to do some work for him. My music is a spiritual expression of what I am, my faith, my knowledge, my being, and when you begin to see the possibilities of music, you desire to do something really good for people. To help humanity from itself, from its hang-ups, I want to speak to their souls. And I could tell you John Coltrane spoke to mine. I was reading Lewis Porter's book probably for like the 10th time, and I noticed that on page 289, and Dr. West, I put the page number because I know you do that, so I copied you if you don't mind. I've been influenced by you greatly. And he was in New Jersey at my house. Oh, New Jersey is a typo. At my house a couple of weeks before he died. He wanted to open a club where children come and listen to music. These are the words of Yusef Lateef. I did not know that when I started my work, but somehow if I feel like the Kids for Coltrane continue John's dream of having a place, and if Ravi was here, I know Alice spoke to that as well. She wanted to have a place where children could come and meditate and listen to music. And of course, the children and I, as stated in the New York Times interview, saw a connection to Dr. King and the message he brilliantly told us through words. John Coltrane tells us through the vibrations, through his brilliant music. Truth is indestructible. It seems history shows, and it's the same way today, that the innovator is more often than not met with some degree of condemnation, usually according to the degree of his departure from the prevailing modes of expression, what have you. Change is always so hard to accept. We also see that these innovators always seek to revitalize, extend, reconstruct the status quo in their given fields whenever it is needed. John tells us this. My students and I will study Einstein, and we'll study Van Gogh. We'll look at our own work that we've created together. But this is what we need to teach children, to have the courage to be themselves, to get that information that they're learning, digest it, make it their own, and then become something unique, make their own path instead of just following who are we as a people if we don't create and become better? And my push with the Kids for Coltrane is to have that environment where children feel safe enough to do that. Parents nominated me for an award. These are the students that originally were Kids for Coltrane, and they continued on. They're both going to great schools now. This was one of the original founding members, the little boy, and he brought his sister into the program. And this is not a plan. Dr. West has been a supporter of my work, and of course, as I mentioned, Nat Hentoff, and I'm going to read their quotes before I draw this to a close. What makes Coltrane one of the most interesting jazz players is that he's not apt to ever stop looking for ways to perfect what he's already developed and also to go beyond what he knows he can do. He is thoroughly involved with plunging as far into himself and the expressive possibilities of his horn as he can. And Dr. West tells us, music at its best is a grand archaeology into and the transfiguration of our guttural cry, the great human effort to grasp in time our deepest passions and yearnings as prisoners of time. Profound music leads us beyond language to the dark roots of our scream and the celestial heights of our silence. Dr. Cornel West. I was talking to a researcher, a Coltrane researcher, David Tegnell from Duke. And what he said to me was, and he's been to the family of the Coltrane legacy, generations of them. He even went to the slave house of John's relatives, which was amazing. And what David told me surprised me at first, and then I reflected upon it. He said, John's story is a common story. It's an American story of human suffering. It's John's brilliance that teaches us what happened. So the Kids for Coltrane is an attempt to tell the truth. And now I'd like to bring up Dr. Cornel West.
Testing, there it is, there
Hello?
it is, there it is.
Got it?
Testing, 1, 2, 3.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. So Dr. West, thank you so much. And this has been improvisation for me because Ravi was supposed to be here. And as jazz would have it, I'm honored to have Dr. West here, as you can imagine. So I think I'm going to start with a quote. I went to Harvard University for professional development because one of the things that I insist upon for myself is to not teach because I think so, because I know so through research. So I went to Harvard for PD, and one of the things I took away with was from a neuroscientist, Dr. Imardino Yang. And this is what she says, Dr. West. Emotion allows us to use our knowledge in ways that will be culturally appropriate and useful, both in school and outside of school. Emotions are not add-ons that interfere with cognition. Instead, they are fundamental element of why thinking and learning happen. Emotions involve the self and the body, and therefore, so should schools. So my question is to you, how do you see John Coltrane's music affecting the emotions of the children and enrich their thinking, their cognition?
Thanks for the question. Again, I want to salute your work, and it's so magnificent just to look and see the sparkle in the eyes of those precious young ones. Yeah, absolutely. That's so crucial to young people. And I want to salute also Sister Joanne Stevens for being kind enough to have me, and wonderful work you do, and the two Johns, John Hare, John Gray, and Chuck Stewart. What can we say? We got a great artist in the house. Let's give it up again for Brother Stewart. Great artist in the house. No, but I think the important thing in thinking about John Coltrane is that he is an artistic genius. He's a spiritual giant. He is a moral titan. But he's a freedom fighter. And he comes from a people who have been terrorized and traumatized and stigmatized. So that his genius is part of this tradition of a people who, being so hated, still generate the courage to love, beginning with themselves and then spilling over. He's people who have been treated so unfairly that he had to teach through his horn a sense of what justice is. And he doesn't do it by himself. It's a whole host of voices there. Monk and Miles Davis, Nina Simone, Curtis Mayfield, Donny Hathaway, Duke Ellington. So he's not an isolated individual on a pedestal. He's a voice in a vital tradition of a people. And what you bring to this is precisely how he's able to crystallize through his genius this particular way of emotionally dealing with terror and trauma and stigma. Because so many of our young people these days, of all colors, but disproportionately chocolate, they are traumatized thoroughly. Market culture, stimulated, titillated, bombarded every day, not appealing to the best side of them, their bodily stimulation, not their soul stirring. Coltrane's a soul man at the deepest level, right? How could a people who have been through so much terror and trauma and stigma generate so much militant tenderness and subversive sweetness and radical gentleness as their freedom fighters? That's Coltrane's sound. He doesn't do it all by himself. You got McCoy, you got Jimmy Garrison, he got a whole host of others. We can go on and on and on, not just in his quartet, but influence. And you bring all of those in the teaching that you do. So that I think when we talk about emotion, it's always relative to both a human context, because all human beings wrestle with fear and anxiety and insecurity on their way to being culinary delighted terrestrial worms. So it's the very idea of your body being in extinction soon can generate some anxiety. But then when you put the social and the political dimension on it, you see, taught to hate yourself, told you're less beautiful, told you're less moral, told you're less intelligent. That's the vicious legacy of white supremacy. That Coltrane, born in gut bucket Jim Crow, North Carolina, Hamlet, North Carolina, allows to flow through him by his mastery of his craft and by his mastery of his technique. And it affects everybody. You can see it among these precious children. And again, I think that the job that you're doing is so very important because it's hard to get high quality arts and music to young people these days. I don't care who it is. People, young folk don't even know who Gil Scott-Heron is for the most part, let alone Coltrane. What is happening? What is a hemorrhaging taking place so that the richness of a tradition of a people who helped America learn how to love and have a sense of justice is not being bequeathed and transmitted to that younger generation, you see. And he's got that kind of revolutionary spirit in him. So they respond both at that human level, but also at that sense of, ooh, he's speaking to a trauma that a lot of these other folk not speaking to in these other classrooms. You can imagine. Juxtapose your classroom to some of these other classrooms.
I'm going to read this to you. This is, I have some of their work here and little quotes, but this speaks to that. Thank you for teaching us something no other teacher did. You taught us to appreciate the music and the effort of brilliant people in the United States, so they won't be forgotten. After all, we need to know about the people that paved the way for us and millions of others. So that speaks to what you're saying in justice is not charity, right? So here's an American genius, and this was a question that I had in my mind that propelled me to keep going. Justice is not charity. So here we have John Coltrane, a genius, an American genius, a global genius. And I would survey people, not musicians at first, and I said, you know who John Coltrane is? And the answer was no. And that devastated me. So in that room where John Coltrane wrote A Love Supreme, I made him a promise that I would lift not only jazz in America, but his name throughout the country. Now that's pretty big, don't you think? But somehow I'm sitting here on this stage. And I think along the way, anything involved with John that is truthful, anything that is pure, John's spirit comes around and uplifts us because this is right. Justice is not charity. John Coltrane is a genius, and his name should be on the lips of every American school child. Now, I couldn't do this alone. Now, I have Dr. West's support and Nat Hentoff and the Coltranes, but that's not enough with all due respect. I need the children. The children tell the truth because this is the kind of education that they want. I see it every day. It's not about standardized tests. They don't care. They care about their souls, their hearts, if they're being affirmed. And the next question, Dr. West, is, can John Coltrane's work teach children to believe in themselves in the sense that their individuality comes out? If we look at his music and his life and what it represents, can it give children the courage to find their own path?
I think courage is a crucial word because it's been said in America that rich kids get taught and poor kids get tested. So that testing is not a place where you gain access to courage. You're being evaluated by folk, many of whom already look down upon you and already don't believe in you. So that courage has to come from somewhere where people love you, support you, affirm you, believe in you, and believe in fact that you could be true to what the national anthem of black people actually is, which is lift every voice. Whereas most young people these days are taught to be echoes, they're not taught to be voices. You see, they're taught to be copies, they're not taught to be inventions or creations or originals in that sense. John Coltrane was an original. He was an invention, he was a creation. He found his voice, but he found it because of North Carolina, Reverend Blair, grandfather, AME Zion Church. He found it because of Philadelphia, the Heath Brothers, Curtis Institute. He found it because of New York, Monk, Charlie Parker. We can go on and on and on. They believed in him enough for him to find his voice. And that's exactly what we want for every young person in the country, to be able to believe enough in themselves. So good to see you, Brother Michael. Believe in themselves to find their voice, and where they land we know not of, because we're not trying to dictate where they land. It's about freedom. And when you're free to choose. But in order to be free, you had to have some experience of what it is to break from the convention, to break from the mainstream, to break from the status quo. So when you hear John Coltrane playing songs that Malcolm X, Martin Luther King Jr., you think his artistic agent wanted him to do that? No, he was free. And I tell that to the young folk these days. Kanye West, Jay-Z, Beyonce, great entertainers. What kind of freedom do we see at work in terms of speaking to the suffering as it connects to movements in place? Coltrane insisted with his horn to go into the rallies and so forth, you see. So that's a certain kind of freedom that is, I think, highly significant that our young people need to hear, because it's more and more distant reality in their lives.
Well, the miracle that I see of John Coltrane's music, and I say it's a miracle because it came to me without a plan. So for me, it was a miracle. It wasn't like my parents taught me about Coltrane and I knew this and I had to teach children. The children and I discovered it together, and we heard the vibrations, and this is what came of it. And speaking to what you just said about tradition, Dr. West, I'm going to give you two more quotes from students. Amy says, well, this is not Amy's, this is Mubin. Mubin says, overall, the impact of art on humanity is very great. Art is a way for humans throughout history to express their emotions. The most meaningful of art was created by musicians who were both intelligent and embodied the traits of having courage, having discipline, and being tied to tradition. One of the most important musicians in American history was John Coltrane. As a musician who embodied these characteristics, John Coltrane was able to create meaningful artwork. All in all, John Coltrane is an amazing musician who embodied many characteristics which he was able to use in order to create meaningful music. And Gabrielle says, music is beautiful. It is our emotions, our joy, our happiness, and our voice. It takes courage and discipline and turns it into something beautiful. Music will teach our generation to have the courage to say what we want. And so I think it speaks to that. I think I'll have one more question, and then we can open it up to our beautiful audience. We are celebrating A Love Supreme, this magnificent masterpiece. And it's unbelievably moving to me as a human being. So, Dr. West, what do you think children can take away from John's A Love Supreme? Final question.
Wow, yeah, that's a tough one, though. I mean, when you reach that level of artistry, there's a deep mystery, and the magnitude of the mystery sort of hits people in different ways, and it hits young folk in different ways. My own beloved daughter here, Zaytun, it hits her in a certain way in terms of the impact on her heart, mind, and soul. So it's hard for me to speak on behalf of the young folk. It really is. It's very difficult. I would say this, though, that it certainly frees them up from being locked in the form of psychic and spiritual bondage that the dominant society puts upon them. Because the dominant tendencies in our society, financialize, privatize, and militarize. And so to be human as a young person is be obsessed with money on the one hand, me on the other hand, and security because of fear. That's the kind of soul craft that neoliberal capitalist culture produces every day in young people. That's why the we consciousness of Coltrane is more and more alien, because for young folk these days, and more we older folk too, is me, I. Coltrane's we as an I. You see, it's very different. He had to make money, yes, but he knew that life was a gold rush, means worship the golden calf. He refused to worship the golden calf. He kept his eyes on the prize. And the prize for him was what Martin King called the beloved community. And love for him was not a plaything at all. Love for him was the key that opened the door to ultimate reality. And by love, he understood its connection to justice, what love looks like in public. And so in that sense, it was alluring and a calling for him. And I would hope in young people, somehow in listening to Coltrane, they could be unshackled from a certain kind of hedonism, materialism, narrow individualism, and have a we consciousness, a sense of love connected to justice, and a courage to hope for something better than just the same old materialism, hedonism, and rapacious individualism that is so entrenched in our culture. And so he frees all of us up in some sense. And I hope young people are freed up, because young people tend to be much more hungry and thirsty for the real thing. They haven't been jaded by the culture. But by the time when you get 15 or 20 years old, you're already deeply shaped, and you're going to need a catastrophe in your life for a shattering to take place. And of course, catastrophe is on its way to everybody's house. It's coming. But usually that's the one thing that could break. Whereas for young folk, they already got a sense of awe, wonder, not just curiosity, perplexity. You see, which is that they wondering how to figure it out. What this doesn't make sense. And Coltrane has that childlike, not childish, childlike quality of all geniuses. All geniuses are childlike. Be it Beethoven, Coltrane, Picasso, Curtis Mayfield, whoever it is, Nina Simone. They always can't wait to grow, develop, and mature even more as they are true to their calling, not just their career.
That's beautiful. I'm going to end with a Kids for Coltrane song. I'm not going to sing it because I can't, but this is an excerpt. You gave us hope in music, born on the equinox, bringing change. Just know truth is real. Train, train, train. So many children singing for peace. So many children feeling, giving. A love supreme, a love supreme, a love supreme. I thank you, Dr. West, and I will open it up
Thank
to
you.
questions for
Absolutely.
Dr. West.
No, both of us, please don't hesitate.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted that you're here. We have in our possession now the original manuscript of John Coltrane's A Love Supreme. And in looking at it on the back of it, it really speaks to, in his own writing, it's almost like he found God and the great significance of God. And I think this was written in the 60s, somewhere around there. So what is it that happened that that brought us A Love Supreme, and where does God fit into his music, and that creativity?
Do you want to take a stab at that? I mean, it's hard to read anybody's soul, though, brother, in terms of what's going on in individual life. As I said before, his father was a preacher's kid at AME Zion Church, Reverend Blair, and that he had already encountered God within that particular black church context, that Christian context. Now, he also goes through deep changes. He's got different kind of addictions. When he gets to Philadelphia, he has to go cold turkey on his mother's couch in April 1957. He makes a break, and he is constantly trying to artistically go as far as he can on a European instrument founded by Adolphe Sax in Belgium called a saxophone. But he's going to play that European instrument the way no European could ever conceive of playing it, or American either in some ways, you see. At the same time, spiritually, he has his own challenges, his personal life, his political life, his family life, and so forth. So all of these things go into, that's why I don't think we can ever come up with one story, a narrative that would fully account for the genius. But what happened on December the 9th, 1964, in New Jersey at Van Gilder was a Kairos moment. That is to say, it was a moment of such profound meaning and significance with those other musicians. And Sister Alice talked about this all the time. When he came down with the music, she looked in his eyes and said, something profound has taken place. And he said, I can't wait to get to the studio. But we don't have a full account. I don't think we ever have a full account of that kind of production of a genius. But certainly, God was a fundamental, his relationship with God was fundamental in his journey. But the God that he's talking about, in many ways, is a God that pulls not just from the Christian tradition. He was shaped by the black church, my own tradition. But he explored India, Eastern religions. He was reading theories of relativity of Einstein and so forth and so on. So in many ways, his God is a radically ecumenical God rather than the Christian God that he grew up with. But we know that God meant the world to him. That's just the beginnings of an inadequate answer to your deep question, brother. I think we can't answer that, account for that genius of me.
Great answer.
be able to allow all of our kids, all of our citizens to fulfill their destiny. We can't just pursue some place, a job. We have to strive to educate our citizens to fulfill their greatest potential. Because, as you said, Coltrane was not one. The question that I often find myself wondering is, how many Coltranes have been locked up, have been killed in the streets because they're just trying to survive? And so I commend you on your efforts to bring this work to the forefront. I commend you for seeing an individual who was worthy of being recognized and uplifted. And those children that you're touching with this music, they're going to go on and become things that we can't even imagine. And so I thank you, Dr. West, I thank you as well for coming and sharing your time. Outstanding program. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your generous words.
Thank you, Roberta. Kind words.
Beautiful.
I think you said it eloquently and with power, brother. And I'm so glad you shared that with all of us, though. Absolutely. Thank you so very much. No, indeed. But this is part of, I think, what I was trying to say, and I think we'd all have to agree in this sense that when you talk about a John Coltrane, you're talking about someone who comes out of a tradition, a community, a network of people who are affirming him. You know the story about when he got to Philadelphia and he's in the projects and he keeps blowing his horn. And they were going to kick him out of the projects. And the pastor of the church next door knocked on the door, gave him the keys and said, you can blow in my church anytime, any day of the week, so you and your mother won't get kicked out of the project. You see, that's what the Isley Brothers call Caravan of Love. That's the love train. That's the kind of love that he's also acknowledging in Love Supreme. He never forgot that minister who allowed him to blow in his church anytime he wanted because he's blowing too much at night and in the afternoon, and they're going to kick he and his mama out, and he's the only child. Now, you also know his mother goes first. He's there by himself. He loses his father, his grandfather, and his grandmama all within 17 months, and they say he was blowing his horn trying to bring his mama and his daddy and his grandmama and his grandpapa back. Now that is in High Point. He already left Hamlet now. He's right with your folk. He's in High Point at that point. But to try to get these kinds of crucial stories out, they're not marginal. They are crucial because there is no John Coltrane without your folk, without that minister. Of course, without his mama, without his grandparents, without AME Zion Church. And then the others who I talked about, because you got to talk about the artists too. Miles, who gave him a chance. Monk, who taught him right in his living room. Coltrane show up in the morning, 7:30. Monk said, "No, I'm not opening the door till 8:01." Coltrane just sitting there with his horn, 8:01. Come on in. And they stay for 6 hours. And Monk's just teaching. Sometimes right is wrong. No, that's wrong. Sometimes wrong is right. Come on, John. Oh, okay. There's no Coltrane without that. But then he's still the distinctive Coltrane. Just like you distinctive you, I'm distinctive me, Sister Christine, distinctive Christine. But it's that tradition. I'm so glad you shared that, because that's one of the ways we both humanize, contextualize, and as you rightly say, do not sanitize. Because in the end, none of us fully understand the brother. We just don't. But to make it available to all, especially the young folk, that's what I think is also so very important. Yes. Absolutely. Oh, absolutely. 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 In fact, I would say not just local and regional and national, but global. See, Coltrane's on the global stage. We got our dear brother from Tokyo flying back and forth, put together Coltrane Chronicles. He's on the global stage. He's bigger than most of America. I mean, I have great respect for Smithsonian and everything, but Smithsonian is still American. Coltrane's deeper than just the American. You see? He's deeper than just the North American. He is at the global stage, rooted in the local. The R-O-O-T-S linked to the R-O-U-T-S. His roots are rich, the routes that he takes to every corner of the globe.
Hi, thank you both very much. You've both given really powerful examples of how the arts are incredibly vital to education and educating the whole child. And I think if anyone wasn't convinced, we are all convinced now. So if we all agree, and you speak so powerfully on this, that the arts are an important part of our educational system, why do we find ourselves in a situation where the arts are cut in education repeatedly? And you spoke to that too, Christine, about, that's always the first thing to go. And I feel like we've been having this conversation for a really long time about how the arts are always the first thing to go and we got to bring them back. So what are some concrete steps that you both see that we should all be leaving this room and going out and doing, and who should we be talking to, and what should we say, and how can we all be making that case even more eloquently and every day?
Well, I'll start, and then Dr. West, you could finish. I could give you my opinion, and I'll be careful because I still work for the New York City Department of Education. But what's really important is to ask yourself this question: who's teaching your children? Are we being really responsible as adults? Are we forgetting that our children are in the hands of a system, and what is that system doing? Now, if it's a great system, good. But I've compared and contrasted different systems, the private school, for example, to the public school in different communities, and I see a huge difference. In private school, the arts still exist. So who's going to do it? We have to do it. Maybe it's because we were disenfranchised as children and we just continued on. But we have to go back to our own roots, remember what it was like to be a child. Kids for Coltrane started because I couldn't stand my education. I have a master's degree, an advanced degree, a 4.0 GPA, et cetera, But I did not have a voice in a patriarchal country that treated me like a second-class citizen. So I went back and I formed a classroom that I wanted to be in. What kind of country do you want? The answer is us. Now, I don't know exactly what you have to do. I've created a program with no budget. My children will tell you that I use my own money. I went to Harvard 4 times. I took a loan from my pension fund. Because, as John would say, we have to be a force for good. And I'll just, before I give it to Dr. West, one of my little students said to me, I also desire to be a force for good and be remembered in the world as a person that established a better world and pushed the future into the most beneficial direction. Through the music of John Coltrane, the children are learning that they have to have the courage to make the difference. So I don't know the answer. I know I'm doing my part in the best I can, but I really don't know. But I'll leave you with this question. Who's teaching your children? Dr. West?
No, I think that's so crucial. I think first there's a question at the individual level, which is what Sister Christine just talked about with great insight. What kind of teachers and what kind of people, and in the end, what kind of community and nation we want to be. You see, if we're just going to be about markets and smartness and dollars, and not also about curiosity, creativity, and imagination, then you end up with being a certain kind of people, a certain kind of nation. You see. We started with the great Du Bois, and Du Bois said what we used to hear in Vacation Bible School. He said, the young folk not just care that you know what they want to know, that you care. And if you really care for the young folk, concerned about the young folk, focus on the young folk, then they can more easily believe in themselves. Get that precious intangible called self-confidence, self-respect that no one can ever take away from you once you have really internalized it at that deep level. And that's what great teachers do. That's what Sister Christine does with her kids. And it cuts across colors. Vanilla, chocolate, across the board. Once the kids know you care, they open their hearts and minds and souls, you see. At the same time, though, because of the legacy of white supremacy, it's harder for red, brown, and black children to gain that kind of care. And that's why when we look at our school system, that's the second level, the structural institutional level, you will find what I call crimes against humanity, the decrepit school systems in too many chocolate cities, the crushing of souls, the undermining of potential, the undercutting of their sense of possibility. That's a crime against humanity. America been doing that for over 300-some years. Poor across the board, but especially black and brown. And then red. We got to remember our red. They don't have to be in the room for us to be sensitive about the children, too, because that's part of Coltrane's tradition. Love supreme for everybody. He learned that in gut bucket Jim Crow, North Carolina. Meaning what? We got to continue to fight, put pressure on our politicians, too tied to big money, so that they're willing to accent just what is payoffable, what's translatable into money, rather than, oh, listen to John Coltrane. What kind of job is that going to get you? Oh, so education just about a job. That's the market model. Yeah, you need a job, a high-quality job. But there's a democratic model of education. It has to do with critical consciousness. It has to do with what kind of person you're going to be. It has to do with what people are going to say at your funeral when your body's in the coffin. And they're not going to talk about how much money you had. They're going to talk about what kind of person you were. Coltrane put the question right there. Yes, you wanted to be a person of integrity, honesty, decency, and virtue, and that's the tradition that I come out of. But thank you, Sister Christine, for this wonderful.
I think we've had a feast today in terms of this presentation and the spirit through John Coltrane that these two, Christine Pastorella and Cornel West, have presented. Again, another round of applause for them. And a reminder of the Robbie Coltrane concert tonight at Lisner Auditorium, and also the presentation of the George Washington University faculty and student ensembles It's a free concert. Tickets may still be available on the Lisner Auditorium website, and this is a community event that's being co-presented by this museum and the George Washington University Music Department. Thank you.